What would constitute a perfect successor to the Diablo series? Based on the immense response and feedback to my comparison of Diablo II and Diablo III, I decided I'd follow it up with what I believe could be done to re-energize the popular franchise. This is based on what I like about each of the entries of the Diablo trilogy, Path of Exile, Torchlight 1 and 2, and other hack and slashers. But I've also read through hundreds of posts, polls, and comments, and have taken into account many people's requests or concerns of the past games. But there is a definite measure of subjectivity here. So really, this is what I would try to do if I was somehow the director of the next Diablo game. I've put together a high-level concept. I'm not stating that I would know what works and what doesn't without actually building a game and playtesting it thoroughly. So without further ado, I now present my blueprint to a perfect Diablo sequel. In almost unanimous agreement, Diablo lost quite a bit of soul in its last entry in the tone and visual design department. Though a mature-rated game, it didn't scratch the thematic itch many were expecting. Bloody, gothic, horror. In this regard, it could learn a few things from the first two games, particularly the original. Tension and purpose should firstly be communicated through your adversaries, and whispers of their horrific acts from the townspeople. Shambling undead, inferno-brandishing demons, and blood ritual cultists should be your unwelcome hosts to this forsaken tour through purgatory. Monsters so odious and despicable, you're driven to destroy them for the sake of others, or so putrid and miserable for their own sake. Accompanied by disfigured and dangerous antagonists, like towering murderers from a slasher film, striding toward you with an unquenchable bloodlust in their eyes, whether exclaiming their taste for fresh meat,
fresh meat,
or chilling you to the bone with the infamous,
"Not even death can save you from me."
Fear is also based on the power dynamic between the player character and the world itself. In the first game, you were a simple adventurer, unfortunate enough to be in Tristram, and foolish enough to enter the cathedral. You weren't a hero. You weren't a Nephilim. You felt weak and up against a great and powerful enemy. Just another corpse for the pile. You just didn't know it yet. You are, after all, entering decrepit crypts, dungeons, and installations of torture, malice, and demonic possession. There should be a seamless transition from wandering outside to entering a dungeon, where it takes a second to adjust your eyes to the barely visible outlines of your new ill-lit environs. Omnipresent darkness, scarcely thwarted by the flicker of your torch. Leaving these halls and chambers, if even to be greeted by the dreary light of overcast, should be blinding, a stark reminder of both literal and moral darkness you're fighting against. A sense of suspended dread should be present at all times. There would be foreboding grimoires, books, and other scraps that are scattered around the world, not telling whole stories, but indirectly alluding to lore and setting details that you'd have to piece together and interpret if you so wish. Lore bits could even be rationed in each playthrough and picked by roulette, so you wouldn't learn everything on the first few runs. Think Dark Souls, with the spice of chaos and randomization thrown in. The main plot could be anything from Tales of the Sin War, the origins of the World Stone, Soul Stones, the prequel to the original Diablo host, or the events leading up to Talrash's imprisonment of Baal. Permanence and flexibility are two ends of the character progression design spectrum that each have their merits and disadvantages. Irreversible application of skill and attribute points all too often leads to suboptimal builds, whereas the loadout system lets you dramatically transform your character at a whim, at the cost of the illusion that your character is truly your own. I would propose a system that gives the player permanent choices and fairer application of progression resources. It could work like this. Each time you level, you could apply points to both passive perks and active skills. Each passive would be assigned to an attribute tree, such as strength, dexterity, vitality, and energy. And let's say the acquisition of a strength perk, the ability to deflect ranged attacks with a shield, would simultaneously improve your strength. Say you bought the energy perk, Quick Casting. That would add to your energy attribute too. Similarly, with active skills, acquisitions of one of your class tree's skills would buff the branch of that class. Using Diablo II as a reference, say you added a point into Clay Golem, Iron Golem, and Blood Golem, that would increase your Golem branch level by 3 points, which affects each of the aforementioned skills. So even if your build is questionable, points applied would still develop your character's powers in those branches, removing progression waste and obsolete skill buys. Respecs could also be in the game, but at a heavy gold, material, or experience level cost. Some active abilities could be affected by the weapon type you use. For example, with a flame ability, a dagger might make a potent but short-range flame. The swing of a staff might make a diluted flame cone, and a spear would make a narrow but longer range spike of fire. This wouldn't apply to all weapons and all abilities, but it would allow some flexibility of sorts, similar to Guild War II's weapon and ability system, but without completely redefining your character on a whim. Classes would be diverse in ability and role, and could have synergistic skills to work both solo or with others in a party. Classes would also be very flexible and able to be developed into a wide array of viable builds, rather than be locked into a few workable molds. In keeping with the grimdark horror atmosphere and theme, class ideas and names could be introduced, such as an executioner, essentially a more thematic barbarian, witch hunter, master of swords, bows, and debuffs, demonologist, who could use evil's power against itself at some unholy cost, blood mages, hexers, or lycanthropes. Healers and buffers, such as a cleric or inquisitor, could keep themselves and their peers alive, while wielding magic powerful against the undead. Sorcerers, arcanists, and other spellcasters would be in order. It'd be interesting to have a dedicated summoner class, who conjures a single mighty golem or other such creature, with some inspiration from the underrated 2001 game, Summoner. The Necromancer would return also, who relies on reviving a horde of the dead in many shapes, sizes, and forms to combat their enemies. To reward dedicated players of the game, but not devolve into an eternal grind, would be to take the Paragon level system and turn it into bragging rights rather than stat bonuses, each level granting currency for purchasing rare and collectible vanity items to show off. You know what they say about too much of a good thing. This axiom could be applied to combat. If there is no ebb and flow, no pacing, fighting monsters with all the flashiness, feedback, and shock value on a constant on can turn gameplay into a hazy blur, rather than a tense and rewarding experience. Pace monsters out, provide quiet areas for building atmosphere or exploring, offer basic puzzles or mind challenges in between the reflex-based ones. These changes can help make fighting seem more meaningful, as well as vary up the gameplay and make it more interesting. To make terrain, combat strategy, and puzzles more engaging, a full physics engine could be implemented. You can see the foundations of such logic and interactivity in the Diablo games, but they never take it very far past an occasional distraction. If you took cues from the brilliant Divinity Original Sin games, you could see dynamic situations that would fluctuate based on the materials and physics at hand. Heat, cold, gravity, inertia. These are all things that make environments much more interactive and immersive. Cast a frost ray at that monster in the puddle to freeze them in place. Swing your hammer at a pack of barrels to launch them as projectiles. Throw a burning flask to thaw out an icy wall or burn down an impasse of vines. With logical chemical and physics-grounded reactions in place in the game engine, interesting and emergent gameplay could make peaks in the standard hack-and-slash rhythm. New mechanics and challenges in boss battles could come about when a certain element is present that you have to avoid or counteract. A swoosh of wind to put out a fire, freeze a tentacle in place before it slithers away to safety, or fling stones toward a distant column to collapse the ceiling down on them. The possibilities are staggering. I've always disliked multiple meters or inhibitors stacked on abilities. Either let me use the ability until resources are spent, or wait the cooldown. Don't do both. One change I would make in this hypothetical sequel is that I would remove cooldowns on spells, just retain mana cost and casting speed. This would free attention to the task at hand, rather than having to juggle multiple limiters. One idea for a new mechanic to add to the game was a sort of ultimate ability, which wouldn't be able to be cast at all times, but would have to be built up to readiness through specific actions or damage inflicted. This could add a table turner and a very powerful ability to one's build that would be noticeably overpowered compared to normal abilities and spells. There would be multiple ults that could be unlocked in each class's various skill branches. Difficulty has been a sticking point in many people's eyes. Some like the normal Nightmare, Hell, and Inferno difficulty system, where each playthrough would unlock a new tier of punishment and reward, whilst others prefer the swappable difficulty mid-playthrough. I would go for the classic model, but beef each level up and make them have more personality. Difficulty would affect loot drop quality, monster quantities, the tier of monsters fought, and possibly even new ones that are only discoverable in the higher difficulties. Every little bit helps in making each playthrough new and tinged with mystery. One missing feature that was sorely missed from the last entry was the ability to play offline with local characters or private games over direct connection. I would split the main menu with an online and offline mode of the game, where you could start private game lobbies, which couldn't interact with the dedicated server-stored games, and an online mode, which stores all of your information server-side for cheat and hack protection. It may be wise to break servers up by region too, so as to prevent unchecked overseas farming and trading to run amok. Speaking of which, let's bring back trading, social features, and higher player counts. Make certain towns and cities into multiplayer hubs, where a dozen or two other players are seamlessly match-made into a town hub and can be seen running around. Inhibit auction spam over chat, but allow people to meet, trade goods, or start a party of up to 4. Once you leave hubs, you'd be in your party's instance of the game again, similar to Path of Exile. As you wander the Outlands, you may happen upon public events where a dozen or so players may converge on a powerful enemy or scenario to be fought together. This would stir up the normal grind and place another layer of fear on the player if they knew there might be a roaming Dracolich, a demon portal, or a vile horde attacking an outpost just around the bend, but would provide good loot and experience for all that cooperate. You could tag players as allies or rivals in your in-game social screen for later party summons or duel requests down the road. This would help with instancing too, since you could match players with friends, so you wouldn't always have to deal with randoms each time you play. There could be a few hostile areas seamlessly built into the game, which are considered PvP zones, where players could hunt each other down, and perhaps arenas, where duels between 2 players or multiple parties could be fought, tournaments or clan wars executed for leaderboard bragging rights and trophies. NPC companions would return, but to make them more useful and relevant in multiplayer, could take part in a mercenary system, which allowed you to forego the extra help for a time in exchange for other players renting them for a price. Depending on how well you trained your companions up and equipped them, you would get bonus income and rewards if they performed especially well. This is similar to the pawn system in Dragon's Dogma. Carryable containers that help expand your inventory for a cost would be a welcome addition. Being able to send your companion back and forth to town to sell loot and or refill potions like in Torchlight would work, although imposing a fee on items delivered would help incentivize the more frugal players to do their own bartering. Potions would be consumable, but refillable at a price in town by an alchemist, or by dunking the empty containers into certain shrines or wells, for example. This would allow the acquisition of rarer and unique potions that could still be refilled after use. Interesting socketables would make a big and loud return, with interesting effects and elemental damages or resistances to add, rather than the constant grind for the relevant attribute you need. Rare and unique socketables would vary things up too. There should always be multiple ways to acquire good equipment. Money shouldn't ever become worthless, and each unique item should have a truly original and interesting aspect about it, and would act as a keystone for a potential build. Shops should offer low-end equipment all the way up to moderately viable equipment, even at the highest levels. There could be rare traveling traders out in the wild that you could happen across, but would disappear after leaving their vicinity until the next time you meet one. Rare traders could offer better equipment, but only at very high prices, or possibly even trades for items of like rarity. Crafting items could include variable materials that would give unique variations to set recipes. For example, you could make a sword with steel for basic stats, but if you replace that material with mithril, it could have a higher crit chance and attack speed. This is similar to the system used in Dragon Age Inquisition. Loot rarity was divisive in Diablo III. Originally, it was too scarce, then eventually became spammed with loot. Somewhere in the middle would be ideal, and loot could be slightly curated for your character class, but not entirely. Non-magic and lower rarity items should stop dropping in later acts, and difficulties entirely, as those won't be at all helpful at that level and just take up space. And finally, magic item identification. This is an important feedback feature that adds value and mystery to new items you collect. There should be some sort of time or resource expenditure to identify items, but it shouldn't become rote after a few hours of play. Identify scrolls work in the beginning, but eventually become so plentiful that they don't add much to the excitement of getting unidentified items. Perhaps the system, which had tiers of identification, each becoming more challenging to perform. There could be sages that you might discover in the wilderness or locked up in a dungeon that could identify items up to a specific tier for you. That would retain the excitement of getting a powerful looking new item, and would let your mind run wild with what it could be until you identify it. There are two schools of thought about the best Diablo world. Diablo's progressively darker and more dangerous levels of a single deep dungeon, and the large, sprawling worlds sprinkled with smaller side dungeons and medium-sized story dungeons of Diablo II and III. I think the best of both worlds could appease both. Some acts could be wide open spaces with forests, plains, mountains, tundra, etc., while smaller caves, crypts, and dungeons of 1 to 3 floors could offer some contrast. Other acts could include massive 15 to 20 floor dungeons that would offer that sense of depth perhaps lacking from recent entries. Each terrain type should not only look different, but feel different as well. Forest paths should be windy with lots of obstacles. Deserts should be vast and open. Swamps would have clear line of sight, but would be striped with rivers and the like. Mountains should be treacherous with a lot of verticality options. Each act and biome should offer unique opportunities, physics to play around with, and its own feel. Whereas most of the maps generated by previous games are essentially the same pieces, simply shuffled in different orders and sequences each time. It would benefit replayability greatly if the parts themselves would be different each time too. Sometimes there would be a new lodge in the plains area, other times it might be a trader's camp, or maybe a lair of something evil is there too. In short, what you encounter and where you encounter it should be different each time you play, and rare generations like legendary monster lairs or obscure NPCs would really help incite people to replay again and again to see what they find. Adventure mode's randomized quests from Diablo III would return, but in a more integrated form. You could find a job board or NPCs in the various towns that would activate these randomized quests, and they would have a different set of rules and objectives each time. You could make challenges such as not taking more damage than X, else the rare potion delivery is destroyed, or kill all raiders before they murder X villagers or more. You get the idea. Give out randomized scenarios, goals, and objectives each time you do a random quest in order to spice things up. Dungeons could have randomly generated surprises, rushes, and standoffs at unpredictable points. Mini-bosses in the longer ones, and perhaps hidden and secret rooms that only keen observers might find. This is a summary of ideas and desires that myself, and maybe a few others, would like to see in the new successor to the action RPG crown. It may be a pipe dream, but I do believe that these major steps forward in gameplay, interactivity, replayability, and immersion would breathe new life into a franchise which is not entirely revolutionary as it once was. Will Blizzard move in some of these directions? Perhaps some of the original creators, or maybe even new developers will take the torch and reinvent the genre once again? Whichever happens, I'll be right there, ready and willing to get my hands on and enjoy the hell out of it. What are your thoughts? Have anything to add or suggest? Let me know in the comments. If you like this video and want to see more similar work in the future, please subscribe. If you would like to help support this channel, please check out my Patreon page. Links in the description. Thanks for watching.